my friends, and welcome once again to From the Earth to the Moon podcast. I'm Andy, and joining me is Elton.
It's me. Hello.
Hello, darling. How are you?
Yeah, good, man. Good.
Cool. And we're here to talk about episode 4, 1968, the story of Apollo 8.
Yeah, 50 years ago.
50 years ago this year.
Yeah, can you believe it?
I mean, neither of us were born at this time anyway, so
Thank
this was always pretty us. But even so, you know, I never think of this as being 50 years ago, all this stuff. It always feels like it was, you know, like 20 or 30 years ago.
I think it's the same as when you think about 1998. That was 10 years ago, maybe.
No, I'm not having it. I'm not having it. It was 5 years ago.
It's not.
Make it stop.
Yeah, I know. It was 20 years ago, man. 20 years ago. What the hell?
Oh, well, I think we should just rename this "We're Getting Old and We Don't Like It" podcast.
Yeah. Please quickly get back to the moon.
Yes, let us get back to the moon, but that is a different discussion for a bit of another day. Just a little quick follow up from last week's episode. We've had some feedback on the Facebook group from I want to pronounce this right. I'm just going to butcher this. I'm sorry, Matt, but it's Matt Raubenheimer. Do you think that sounds about right?
That sounds close enough. It's closer than I'm ever going to get.
It is. I mean, it's South African. I could put on a really bad accent. I'm not going to. You're welcome. But he just clarified that the shots of the Saturn 1B from the Apollo 7 launch were the actual 1B from Apollo 7.
Yeah.
So although it did still mix in some shots of the Saturn 5, which were not anything to do with that, the 1B shots all seem to be the Apollo 7 ones. So yes, I thought that was a little bit interesting. Something to add on there.
Of a serial number on there as well, wasn't there?
Yes, they carried the serial. I'm sure the Saturn 5s did as well, but I know on the 1Bs they had a serial number down near the bottom. It would SA-20 and then whichever number the launch was. And the Apollo 7 one was SA-205, which is clearly visible on the screenshots he was very kind to provide us. So thank you, Matt.
Yeah,
much
thank you
appreciated.
very much.
Well, without any further ado, shall we get on with this? Let me just ask you, general thoughts on the episode.
Okay, general thoughts on the episode. This is a very different episode to the other ones that we've seen, especially the documentary one. I found it slightly jarring with the black and white, and then all of a sudden colour, and then back to black and white, and then colour when we decide it. It took me out a little bit, but I think overall I quite liked it. It took 20 minutes for me to get into it, though.
I didn't like it.
No?
I straight up don't like this episode.
Oh, okay.
And it's weird in that I don't know why this episode is how it is, because this is an episode directed by David Frankel, who did the Apollo 1 episode.
Yep.
And we've already mentioned he did some of the Band of Brothers stuff. He did Marley and Me, one of your favourite films.
Yep, definitely. And
this is written by Al Reinhardt, who was one of the writers on Apollo 13. So the pedigree there is very good. I think a lot of this might come down to the editing more than anything else, is why I don't like it. There's some creative choices I think were poorly carried out.
Are we talking about the montage when they're blasting off?
Not just that, but yes, that, but just the way it kind of, I mean, it is important, I feel, to ground when the series is set. You know, what was the world of the late 60s? It was a very turbulent time. It was not too dissimilar, perhaps, to the world today. I mean, arguably, the way they were going on about how, you know, 1968 was generally just a massive clusterfuck, you could say 2016 was very similar. Yeah. The only difference for us is it didn't end with a trip to the moon and back. So I get that, but it was very, very, very it felt like a promo for MTV almost, but MTV in the mid-90s.
Yeah, it's got that production style, hasn't it?
It's got that production
style. The fuzzy TVs and the interference on TVs and lots of colours just blending over. You're just waiting for a picture of an astronaut with an MTV flag to stick in it.
Pretty much. And on top of that, some of the bits when they chose to show actual footage in the black and white style, like showing Frank Borman showing how to operate the hatch and everything, just seemed a bit out of place. It's just like, it's just dropped there for near as I could tell, no real reason. I mean, I'm sure that was a conversation which took place in January of 1968. I'm assuming that's when that was.
What, the very first scene?
Yeah.
That was before Apollo 7.
I would have thought so, yeah, because again, they're designing the block too.
Yeah.
And it's just weird. It's dropped there, and then it doesn't really have any bearing. And a lot of the stuff with him and his wife I mean, his wife suddenly goes the full kind of Mrs. Winchester almost towards the end, like, and it's just like, I have not gotten this impression of her up until this point. Now you're convinced your husband's going to die and orbit the moon forever, and has gone a little bit crazy writing the obituaries.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not a fan of this episode, and it really annoys me because for me, Apollo 8 is one of the most interesting Apollo missions. I mean, think about it. This was the first time that humans had left low Earth orbit.
Yeah.
And you know, again, I think this was the first time that the Apollo spacecraft had left low Earth orbit. It was the first time that the Saturn V had launched people. You know, the previous launch had been unmanned, and it just felt a little. I feel this feels almost like the episode they should have done for Apollo 7. And I don't want to take anything away from Apollo 7, but again, it was a low Earth orbit flight of a new spacecraft, I grant you, but they've been doing low Earth orbit for a while with Mercury and Gemini. It just feels like there was a lot more. I feel there should be more weight given to the Apollo 8 one, perhaps, than Apollo 7.
Yeah. Well, that's why I turned around and said it took 20 minutes to get into it, because there was a lot of, not guff, because you have to go through the sit down procedures of, okay, what are we going to do? The Russians have orbited, well, not orbited, they went around the moon and back straight away with an unmanned capsule.
I really quite liked, you know, in the other episodes, the build up to the launches. I'm fine with that. And again, Apollo 7 was entirely the build up. You know, it launches at the very end of the episode. So I'm fine with that. And again, I understand the importance of understanding that the Vietnam War is going on. You know, this is the same time as Martin Luther King was assassinated, on the same day as the Apollo 6 Saturn V launch. I think it was Apollo 6 launched to Saturn V. I will check that while we talk. But, you know, I understand the importance of those sort of segments to kind of paint a picture. Things about Robert Kennedy being assassinated. I get that. It's important to do it. But I feel that it spent far too much time on that. I think it would have been better served perhaps as this was stuff that, again, you know, Frank Borman could have been commenting on, or, you know, just how it is, how are the astronauts themselves reacting to it? How is NASA reacting? I mean, why not just have James Webb trying to make sense of this world, which, you know, isn't particularly interested in moon missions with all the stuff going on. Yeah. Instead, it's montage.
I think the problem with this, though, is that if you're not living 1968, then you're going to have a very hard time really understanding how shit it was. Now, it's going to be the same people living through 2016. Me and you went through it, and it was a tyre fire.
I got the fucking t-shirt, you motherfuckers.
It was a tyre fire of a year, really, wasn't it? And then that proceeded on to 2017 as well.
Which was not much better.
It was slightly better, but 2016 definitely has a footnote in everyone's calendar somewhere.
Put it this way, 50 years' time, when anyone's doing any history of the early 20th century, the answer is just going to be 2016.
Yeah. When did this person die? Oh, it was 2016. When did we screw this up? Oh, it was probably 2016. But I feel that if you don't live through that, then it's very hard to get that onto screen. And I feel the whole episode really is a kind of a yin-yang. And there's more yin than yang. And the yang is someone phoned up and said a lovely word at the very end of the episode where they said, thank you for making 2000.
You saved 1968.
Yeah, you saved 1968. And that was the yang to all the other terrible stuff that was the yin in that year.
Yeah.
And it's very hard if you're not actually living through it, and then you get a nice little happy ending at the end of it. Then it's kind of, well, it doesn't work. It didn't work for me in that respect.
No, I definitely get what you're saying. It almost feels like they built the entire episode around so they could have that payoff for that last line. And yeah, it just wasn't earned, in my opinion. And yeah, like I said, Apollo 8 is, this is, weirdly, of all the stories, this is the prequel almost to Apollo 13, the film, more than anyone else, because there's so much reference to the Apollo 8 mission because we have Jim Lovell in it, he mentions in Apollo 13, the film, that Frank Borman was up trucking most of the way of Apollo 8. And, we get to see that here, and it is kind of cool seeing the guy playing Lovell doing the astronavigation, which again is something we saw in Apollo 13. Yeah. So yeah, it does for me feel a bit of a, I don't want to say missed opportunity, a misstep perhaps,
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, it's really hard. I don't want to rag on it too much because there were bits that I really
there's bits I enjoy and the stuff I definitely want to talk about because again, Apollo 8 is a very important mission, but I just feel that looking at this as just an episode of the show and not in the wider context of the Apollo missions and anything like this has certainly been my least favorite episode to date.
Yeah.
I don't want to, lay my cards down on the table just yet, but my memory is this is my least favorite episode of the entire series.
Ah, okay. So it's all good stuff from now on.
I think this was the low point for me. Again, like I said, I don't want to. I might have blocked something, from my memory for later ones, but this is very much the low watermark for me as I remember it so far. Okay, we'll see. Things might change, but we'll get onto that. But yeah, let's talk about a few more specifics in there. We've already mentioned, there's lots of references to the Vietnam War, which was going on at this time.
Yep.
And we're not going to get into the quagmire that was the Vietnam War.
I don't know enough about the Vietnam War.
All you need to know is it was a massive clusterfuck. Just kind of take the last 20 years in the Middle East, stick it in a jungle. There you go. Yeah. So there you go. But that was sucking up money, resources, and the attention of the public. So, lots of people were kind of having their eyes over there.
Yeah.
We've also got, the civil rights movement is in full swing, with Martin Luther King, campaigning for, civil rights. There's lots of race riots and things like that going on. Yeah. It was a very tumultuous time. You have Nixon is elected president at this time, replacing LBJ, who took over from Kennedy after he was assassinated.
Yep.
So yeah, like I said, for those of us who were not old enough to remember 1968, just think 2016. And that should give you some sense of what's going on there. I did want to mention it starts with a quote, as all pretentious shows must do. And this one was, "One cloud is enough to eclipse the sun," which is attributed to a guy called Thomas Fuller, who is a English churchman and historian, apparently.
Oh, okay, cool.
So that I think kind of should set the tone for what to expect in this.
Yeah, I feel it does, yeah.
Again, we have reference to the Robert Kennedy assassination, who was John F. Kennedy's younger brother, I believe.
Yes.
And I think that, it highlights, again, that connection to Kennedy and his dream of landing a man on the moon, but at the same time, it was tangentially connected at best, and I don't see quite why they had to do that whole thing there.
Well, I think it was a big deal. That's the reason why it's shown in there. It's once again a footnote of 1968. So you need that in there.
Yeah. No, I get that. It's just I don't see why everything else was just a bit of a news snippet, and that bit was Mrs. Borman reading the newspaper and having to call Frank.
Right. So I'm not that up on American politics, so.
And neither am I, and we freely plead ignorance on that. I don't understand it, but judging just the episode on its merits as it presents itself, I didn't understand why they chose that moment to do. Because again, like you said, for the first half of this, it's almost entirely stock footage. It's almost entirely there's that kind of documentary newsy drama. I mean, there's a couple of bits which are like when they see the Apollo 6 launch, and they have what's the guy's name? A news reporter they've made up for this, played by Lane Smith, Emmett Seaburn. They show him watching the takeoff, and then you also have them talking about the N1 rocket, which the Russians have, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second.
Let's talk about that when it first takes off as well, because that is just weird. I didn't understand that.
Are we talking about the Saturn V taking off?
I think it's when the Saturn V takes off and that guy takes off his glasses, he gets binoculars.
Yeah.
And everything starts shaking around him. And I'm like,
it seems like he's implying that he is there watching it.
Mm.
And it's very clearly, it's just a video playing behind him. And it feels like something out of an SNL sketch almost, doesn't it?
The thing that I've noticed through all of these episodes so far is the way that they highlight that certain death will befall our great heroes if one thing goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been really strong on that point, to the point where I would imagine that the TV broadcasts would actually do that without any consequences of the kids of the family watching them or the relatives watching that broadcast. And it's just a case of, well, if this goes wrong, then they will die. And, if this blasts off and that will be fine and they clear the tower, something else might go wrong and they will die. And it's very on the nose and unflinching, and we don't care about the repercussions of what we actually just said because it's fact and they will die. And they keep hitting home at that, and I'm expecting it to happen again and again and again. But it's...
Do you remember in Apollo 13, when they're kind of ticking off what's going to happen before they can land, and they go, if this doesn't happen, the heat shield doesn't work, and if the heat shield does work, the parachutes might not open, and they'll hit the ground. And news has been doing that since day one, in effect. The only difference is today we get it 24/7, and I think we're largely desensitized to it.
I don't know. I don't know if they do that nowadays. Well, it doesn't feel like they do it. That they wouldn't turn around and then have, because in Apollo 13 they have footage of an interview with Jim Lovell, and it's a case of, well, watch this, guys, because he's up there now, but soon he may die, and then he won't, and he's just I don't get it. I don't think that would happen now.
We have empirical evidence it does happen now. Certainly more so in the US, I feel, than in the UK.
Right.
But I don't want to draw too much attention to recent tragic events.
Okay.
But I guarantee you, the school shooting recently.
Yeah.
If it went on any longer, they'd have had cameras there filming it. As soon as they found out who was doing it, they're broadcasting the picture everywhere. It is very much a sense. I mean, and this isn't anything new. Like I said, it's always been, they want to get the news, they want to get it out there as fast as possible. And it's not because they want to inform the populace. It's because they want to be first.
Yes.
And at the time that this was done in the 60s, what have you, the news wasn't on 24/7. You had breakfast news, lunchtime news, early evening news, tea time news. And in between, they'd go and gather facts. So hopefully by the time that they actually got on the air, it had been vetted a little bit. It wasn't the first thing that, was given to them. It had a chance to go through and, kind of be filtered a little bit.
Yeah.
Now it's, someone said so-and-so. It's on Twitter. It must be true. Report it. And they will literally say, we're getting reports on Twitter. Blah, 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 blah. They literally will say, we don't have confirmation, but we're going to say it anyway.
Yes, but a chicken said, and we have pictures of the chicken holding the sign that said this.
Yeah. Again, we have early reports that the person inside is so-and-so. Here's a picture of so-and-so. And it turns out it's not them. And they say, oh, well, it was a fluid situation. We had to report quickly. It's, no, you don't.
No, you don't. No,
you really don't.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't think that's any different to what we have today. I think the only difference is we are now so desensitized to it. And again, I mean, just think back to, I suppose, the most recent one we'd all probably remember would be 9/11.
Mm.
And again, that was on, and we didn't have quite the same 24-hour news that we have now, but even so, that was all that was on the news, every channel, pretty much from September the 11th until about a week later.
Oh, easy.
Nothing but that. And it was in the papers for maybe a year after that. It was all there was. So yeah, the news thing, that is nothing new there. That is, that's just how it's always been. It's just, I think back then they at least took a breath in between each bit.
Yeah, fair enough. With that opening montage as well, I know you said it reminded you of MTV stock footage type thing. And it was, because you went from certain, let's say, an aspect ratio, and then it'll cut to a different aspect ratio where it'll be all squished and elongated, and you could see the lines in between all the pixels, and it was just a bit too, it had a very 90s taste to it, didn't it?
It was very energetic,
waiting for the real world to splash up on the front as well. Real world, MTV.
Yeah, it definitely was very jarring for me and took me out of watching it. Strangely, it's the most dated episode we've seen so far. You know, because this very much looks like it belongs in the mid-90s. I mean, I certainly wouldn't if I was trying to convince someone to watch this series and I had one episode to do it in, it would not be this episode I would be using. No. Because it just paints such a false image, really, of what the of what the show is. And so, yeah, that's just a little bit disappointing. I do like the bit where they're talking about the Russian N-1 rocket.
Yep.
And I think this is the first actual mention that we have of the Soviet moon missions since the pilot episode. And I just wanted to very briefly just touch upon it, just to give people a little bit of an overview over what that was.
Yeah.
So the Americans had the Saturn V, which we all know and love. The Soviets had the N-1 rocket. Now, whereas the Saturn V first stage was primarily supposed to be 5 large F1 engines, the N-1 rocket was 30 smaller engines that were supposed to fire in unison.
The clusters.
30 engines.
Yeah. In
clusters, yeah. And then in the second stage, it was 8 engines, whereas again on the Saturn V second stage, it was 5. And 4. It was a massive rocket. It was really large. It was built under very heavy time constraints, much like the Saturn V was. But they were never able to get the engines. The engines themselves were good. In fact, those engines are still technically in use today, unlike the N-1 engines. And I'll explain why in a second. But yeah, they could never get the onboard computer to, in effect, run properly. I believe it had 4 test launchers, and every one of them failed. It never made it to orbit. But in each time, it was usually, a vibration or something would cause one or more of the engines to shut down, and then the onboard computer just couldn't compensate.
Right.
And so, unfortunately, it was destroyed. But yeah, basically after that, they ordered the because I think the guy who designed it was Korolev, who was the Russians' answer to Werner von Braun.
Yeah.
He died before this was completed. This is all featured in that BBC series, The Space Race, I mentioned back in episode 1.
Yes.
So you should all check that out. It's a very good episode. But anyway, he died. So, they tried to carry this on as well, but it didn't work. And basically, after the Americans had won the space race, spoiler alert, they get there first in case you didn't know. But I figure at this point everyone does. They ordered the entire project basically shut down and scrapped. But they didn't want to do that. They basically put all the engines into storage. And they were kept in storage until the end of the Cold War, when the Iron Curtain fell.
Yeah.
And basically then, in the mid-90s, they had 150 of these engines. In the mid-90s, they're looking to raise funds and all this, and they offered to sell them to the Americans. And the Americans are like, you what? You don't have all these engines, you're lying. And they took them to this warehouse. They had 150 of these engines just sitting in the warehouse.
Imagine
and sold
that.
on 36. I know, yeah, it's amazing. And yeah, these engines were so good. They tested them. They were better than anything the Americans had, even in the 90s, basically. So the Americans basically bought a license and remanufactured them, and they're now used in the Delta rockets, I believe.
Really?
Yeah, they still use these engines. They're built in Russia initially under a company called Aerojet, I believe.
Right.
And recently they basically turned around and said, because of politics and stuff like that, they're not going to provide engines for military applications and stuff. I don't know. But anyway, they basically these engines are still in use today, whereas the F1 engines off of the Saturn V, arguably a much more impressive engine given its size and all that, was retired when the Saturn V was retired. Now, they are talking of bringing it back for the SLS, but as I mentioned to you on our episode about the Falcon on the Great Derelict, I don't think we're ever going to see the SLS. So unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever see an F1 engine fire again, which is a shame because it was an amazing engine.
Oh, yeah, I imagine it would be, yeah.
But in any event, yes, the N1 engines live on. So there you go. It wasn't a complete failure after all.
Yeah, I would imagine that the Russians wouldn't want them used for military, just in case they were fired back towards them.
It's not that. The reason I believe it was, mostly it was politics and just, for being dicks, because, they can. The initial hesitation, though, was because their ICBMs are based off of the same engines.
Okay, yeah.
So they didn't want the Americans effectively understanding how they work, and so they helped them. I don't know how it all works, but anyway. The current ones are called the RD-181s.
Right, okay.
So there you go. And a couple of years ago, the Science Museum had an exhibition of the Soviet space stuff, and they had the proposed Soviet lunar lander.
Oh, how different is that to the lunar lander itself?
It's a much earlier development stage. And I think we'll talk a bit more about this next week when we do Apollo 9, when we see the LEM properly. But it was a lot more curved surfaces and stuff like that. It's much more intricate looking. But it does look quite a bit like how the LEM looks in its early stages before they problem solved. I imagine the Soviet lander got cancelled a lot earlier in its development than the American one actually flew. So there you go.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Soviet space shuttle as well. It's very similar to the American version, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
So
very much
very similar.
Well, the reason for that largely is most of the designs for the American shuttle were public domain because NASA is a public company.
Yeah.
And so, they had that. NASA had already done most of the problem solving. So the Russians were like, well, theirs is working. There's our base.
You just imagine them. I know they didn't have it, but, fire up Google.
Yeah.
Print off one of these, please. Thank you very much.
Control C, Control V. In many ways, the Soviet shuttle, Buran, was better than the American one. It could carry more into orbit, yeah. It was also designed to be powered on its descent. It was designed to have bolt-on jet engines, effectively. Mm-hmm. So it could glide and fly and, go to different runways and stuff like that. But it only flew to once before the funding went. But yeah, that's a different story, I feel, for a different day. But there you go. A little bit about the Soviet N1 rocket.
Cool.
Well, it was very impressive, but alas, not to be.
No, that's right. So anything that you did like in this episode then that really caught your attention then?
Well, I do like the cast in terms of the actual astronauts. I mean, just to speak very briefly about the crew. This is the Apollo 8 crew. So this was commanded by Frank Borman.
Yep.
And this was his second space flight. He'd previously flown on Gemini 7. Then we have Jim Lovell as the command module pilot, who we all know and love from Apollo 13.
Yep. And
this was his, I think, third mission. Yeah, because he'd done 2 Gemini missions, Gemini 7, Gemini 12. And then there was Apollo 8. And William R. Anders, this was his first mission. He was the lunar module pilot. The third person was always called the lunar module pilot, even if there was no lunar module there.
Yes. And this time around there wasn't, was there?
There was not, no. So he's still called the lunar module pilot, but there you go. Originally, actually, I was going to say the backup crew for this was Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and it wasn't Michael Collins, it was Fred Hayes. Michael Collins was supposed to be the Prime Crew command module pilot, so Jim Lovell, but he had a herniated disc, so he had to have surgery, so he couldn't.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
So yeah. That's just a little bit. I like the actors playing these guys for the most part. They're cool. I like the. I'm going to finger quote here, the present day stuff. So the stuff in color of the actual mission, I like all that stuff. I think that's all really good and really well done. I like all that. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm ragging on this episode either, but there is so much I just did not like. I despise the launch sequence. Hated it.
All the flashes, and all of a sudden, you don't actually get a launch sequence, though, do you?
You get this weird thing, this launch, and I tell a lie, the launch isn't the bit I like the least on this. It's the insertion to lunar orbit that I hate, where you have this really weird musical montagey bit, and this sense of drama they're trying to build, like this is a dangerous moment, but it just doesn't feel earned. There's no sense of terror or, whereas in Apollo 13, when they're building up to the free return trajectory and they're going out of contact, there are a lot of people talking about, we're going to lose contact, we're all worried about this, and there's real fear. Or when they're going to fire up the SPS engine, there's real concern there, they don't know what's going to happen. But here, and it kind of ties in with Borman's wife's concerns. It's like out of the blue almost, she's suddenly convinced her husband's going to die. And then we have this weird musical montage, which is just overly dramatic, where it's all black and white again. And, you're just seeing the stuff and they get into orbit and that's it. And it's just like, did not like.
I didn't like the wife, who was played by Tom Hanks's real wife as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah. I didn't like, as you said, the way that she all of a sudden started writing obituaries and started flapping.
And it's weird because it kind of came out of nowhere, didn't it?
It felt really out of character. This was a lady that walked in and was, on the launch, it was all very, would anyone like any coffee? Yeah. Looks nervous, but was in control. And then all of a sudden it's Kermit the Frog flailing around everywhere at one moment. And you're like, oh, okay. And she's got, I can't remember the guy that's calming her down and talking us through being...
Deke.
Yeah.
It was Deke.
Was it Deke?
And it was Deke. And he's literally saying, it was either Deke or the controller. It might have been the flight controller.
It was the flight controller.
It's the flight controller guy. But he's saying, it was just weird. It was completely out of left field, I felt. And
yeah, I like what he was saying about the actual engine and the way that it's not
you just open some
firing
valves.
up.
It's hypergolic, is it? We just open valves. It oxidizes. It gives thrust. Nothing has to ignite. There's no moving parts, effectively.
Which worked for me. I loved that. I didn't quite know how they did it. And then him explaining that, they just put these two chemicals into a certain position and they react with each other and whoa, look, sparks and flying and excellent. It'll be brilliant. And that works for me. And I suppose that's him mansplaining to her.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's like an early version of it, isn't it? But
to be fair, she comes across hysterical. So I'm kind of like, it felt very out of character for what we've seen both of her and just the astronaut wives in general. And I don't know if they're just trying to tick off an archetype here and say, we need to show this kind of a thing. But yeah, I just not a fan.
It surprised me because this was the 90s, when this was made, and you would think they wouldn't be going through that because it was all very much girl power through the 90s as well.
Yeah.
There was a lot of girl power going on. And, I hold my hands up. I don't care. Yeah. Good. I quite enjoyed it, actually. And I'm surprised that they went for this tone, which feels very out of place of the time itself and with the character itself.
Yeah.
So very strange. Also, another thing that not jarred me, but I've had a bit of experience with.
Yeah.
And that's when they're building the capsule itself, and they've got all the steelwork laid out, and they got the door on there, and the guy walks up and says, "Yeah, okay."
Can I just also say, I at no point believe that was actually a spacecraft. Like in Apollo 1 and everything like that. When I was looking at stuff like that, I would believe it. That looked like a kid's tent just waiting for someone to throw a blanket over it.
Okay, that I could see that becoming the spacecraft. I've got no problems in that. It was like a wigwam.
I just couldn't. It literally just looked like they just thrown a couple of tent poles together.
Yeah, whether they actually work off of that type of construction, I do not know. Maybe that's like a template which everything fits on top. That's the only way that I could actually work that. But when the two guys were in there talking about the door and saying, okay, so how do they quick release it? Well, you got to open this, turn this valve, knock on this 3 times, and within 20 seconds you're out. And the guy pulls up the chair and goes, right, okay, I'm on my back now. How does this work? And that is the engineering I like, because that is someone, instead of being on the factory floor going, well, it works in front of me right now. I've had dealings where I've had stuff sent out to me and they go, well, it works in the factory shop. And you're like, yeah, but this isn't the factory shop and I can't reach down there. And I can't physically fit down there. And if you drive this thing down on top of me and squish me a little bit, it still wouldn't be able to work. And it's frustrating from an engineer's perspective and a shop floor perspective, where you have acres of space around you and you might even have your Walkman on, and you have free reign of, I can easily get around there and tighten up that bolt. Whereas on site, in situ, you can't. And it was refreshing to see that actually put on the screen, that someone actually thinks like that, and then it's also represented like that as well.
No, I get that, but that almost feels like something that should have been in last week's episode with Apollo 7, because this is the only bit in this episode where we really see that kind of problem solving going on.
But this would have been before Apollo 7, though.
I know, I'm just saying, in this episode,
yeah,
that sequence just seems like, why couldn't that have been? And even if Frank Borman was the one who figured it out, I grant you, take a bit of poetic license, have it be as Walter Schurr in Apollo 7 do it, and have it in last week's episode when it was entirely about him fighting with Rockwell about making a better spacecraft.
Yeah. In
effect. It feels really out of place here. I felt anyway.
I wonder if it's runtime, because it seems like there's a bit of filler in this episode, and maybe they needed to
a bit of. I was going to say I can only imagine why, because let's face it, the entire first half of it's entirely filler.
Well, yeah, exactly, yeah. But
you could have done with a few less shots of the Vietnam War there, perhaps.
But yeah, there's a lot of stock footage in this episode as well, isn't there?
There is.
Yeah, maybe cut 2 seconds off everyone looking at the apartments where what's his name was shot as well. But anyway, yeah, I feel that they might have, because there was a big long run up to Apollo 7 last episode, and we know that we end with the launch. Yeah, and then everyone's fine, smiles, and America, hurrah! And so maybe the runtime was, well, we need to tell this story, and this guy here, he's struggling with a bit of story. He's sitting there, oh look, he's got like some sellotape, and he's trying to make something to fill out time. How about we give him this scene, and they pass that over there? That's all I can think of.
Is it possible? I suppose. I mean, the other aspect we have in here is the mission plan actually changes in light of the N1 rocket being rolled out. Yes. And they're suddenly like, we're falling behind. The lunar module's taking longer to finish, so let's just leave it behind and let's go. And that could have made a good part of the episode, and it makes an entirely good episode. But we'll see that next week, because next week's episode is all about the development of a lunar module. So I don't know. They're just kind of caught in this weird no man's land bit here, I guess.
Yeah.
In between, again, which is a shame because I just feel there's a lot that could have been done there in terms of just to build up, again, if you want to play up that whole worry about the first time, going into lunar orbit and, if they get stranded there, then build up that tension in the first half of the episode. So when we get to that moment when they're going to go into lunar orbit, we feel some real kind of, oh, what's going to happen, So a real sense of worry, but we just don't get that. So it's just a little bit, it's a little bit of a shame. I mean, I do like the interaction of the crew, and I did like the bit when he accidentally inflates his life jacket.
Yeah.
I thought that was quite funny, and the way that Borman and Anders both roll their eyes and go, Navy,
But I also like the fact that they turn around and say, well, you can't just let it off in here because it's going to use up the scrubbers. And you're like, oh, that's right, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can't, can you?
Oh, the other thing as well, it's when they're talking about how there's no lunar module, there's no lifeboat, you don't have that space available to go into, you don't have that engine to get you back, and then when Borman starts being sick and throwing up, and you just have the guy back there saying, it must smell terrible up there. I mean, again, you could build you could have literally started this episode with the launch and just told the story on the way there, and just the unpleasant conditions in there with the occasional flashback. That would have potentially worked better. Because again, I think this was the first time, Shirar had the head cold in Apollo 7 we mentioned last time, but I think, and other astronauts had been sick, but this is the first time someone had been like legitimately ill in space, potentially, and that is in of itself would have been certainly created a lot of tension there. Is he okay, is he not, are they all going to get sick? Although I did like the guy saying diarrhea in space is nothing to laugh about. I mean, the other guy just goes, I bet it smells terrible in there. And it's just like, yeah, I bet it really does. Because, again, you can't go and hide in the lunar module, can you? You're kind of in there.
No, that's right.
I did like how they kind of closed ranks around him, though. Like they just said it's a food spillage, and then, they just sent it back on the tape dump, so it wasn't broadcast. I thought that was quite nice.
Yeah, that's one thing that I would imagine that they'd have like a secret code words to let them know that there was something in the tape dump. Which
I think they actually did say. I think they said they wanted them to look at something in the tape dump specifically.
Oh, okay.
They just said, can you check something in the tape dump or something like that, and probably would have gone from that. Another thing which I think is important, which really I don't think gets enough mention here, is it was the first. Well, it was a survey mission to really pick out the landing sites.
Yeah.
Because although satellites had gone around a bit, 1960s cameras, they're not the high definition ones we're used to here. You really can't really beat the Mark 1 eyeball at this time. So, these guys with the cameras they could take with them, where they could bring back the actual film, were much better than what could have been transmitted from potential satellites which had been around the moon prior to that.
You get a sense of that as well, because when they're flying around the moon or orbiting the moon, they are saying that, we've got some real good definition here. And you go back to mission control, where on the screen you just see like real fuzzy pictures of the moon. You're like, you need someone up there to do this, don't you?
Yeah, and I just feel it would have been nice to see a little bit more of that part of the mission kind of shown out on the, in the episode, effectively. Just some more of that kind of pick out, the Sea of Tranquility there, pick out the Frau Maurer Highlands, which will have, resonance later on in Apollo 13. See him pick out Mount Marilyn. Yeah. Just a little thing for, people that have seen Apollo 13. I think that would have been a nice touch there. So there was that.
There was another nice little touch that they said about not being able to see all the stars.
Yeah.
When they're going round the moon. And, going back to conspiracies and stuff like that. Oh, no, you can't see any stars in any of the pictures. Yeah, but that's because you got a lot of sunlight glaring off the moon, haven't you?
Yeah, it's pretty bright. In fact, you can actually see it from here.
If I open my curtain right now, I'm sure I'll be able to see it.
Well, cloudy, but if it wasn't for that, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the other major thing from the Apollo 8 mission, and it's featured briefly, but I'm kind of disappointed that it was a little bit poorly realized. But I suppose 1990s CG. It's the Earthrise photo.
Okay.
Which is the very famous photo of the Earth rising over the lunar horizon, which everyone will have seen. It's one of the most famous images ever taken. I actually feel they'd have been, because there's video footage of it from Apollo 10, I think it is. And yeah, if you go on the Wikipedia page, you can actually see it. So they have it from other missions. You could have just actually had a bit of the video footage there, which I think would have been better than the iffy CG. But again, maybe just show the actual image a couple of times, from where they were taking the pictures. But I love that picture. You know the one I mean. It's you got the loop. Yeah.
We have nicked it for the album art cover as well.
There you go then. Yeah. I used to have a bookmark of that when I was a kid, and it was just really cool. And I absolutely love that picture. And again, they take a bit of time to show it off, but I just feel that the CG they used to show it, it's really a bit flaky.
Yeah. So what about the stuff in orbit as well? Did you enjoy that sort of stuff?
What, in the lunar orbit?
Yeah.
A little bit. Again, I just feel like there's just not a huge amount of it. I mean, they're going around there. They do the Earthrise bit. They do the Genesis reading, which was very controversial at the time. Well, okay, maybe not very controversial, but a guy tried to sue NASA, an atheist, and he took it to the Supreme Court, and they turned around and said it's not really our jurisdiction, and told him to piss off. I mean, I get it from. I'm not a religious individual myself, so. But at the same time, I don't think it's worth getting your knickers in a twist. Whatever your feelings about the Bible, it is a significant historical text, and the passages they were reading are entirely relevant. Mm-hmm. It is literally, creating the heavens and the earth, and seeing the light and seeing it's good. I have no problems with them reading it whatsoever. So I quite like that. I think it was done. They did it verbatim. They read the entire sequence that they did on the actual thing as well.
I think also, it's fitting though, isn't it? In the human race,
yeah.
It's a fitting thing to do.
Okay, it's a fitting thing to do growing up in the West, I suppose, where Christianity is the predominant religion, and again, America, despite protestations against it, otherwise is largely a Christian country, I suppose. Or at least that's the impression we get. I can see how you'd be upset if that wasn't it, but like I said again, I wasn't looking at it as a religious reading. It's it's like taking a passage from just a classic book, a classic novel, or something like that.
Like Tintin in Tibet.
Absolutely. No, if it was going to be a Tintin one, it'd be Tintin Goes to the Moon.
Oh, nuts! Yeah.
But yeah, it's a bit like a bit of Charles Dickens. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. That was the quote they used for Apollo 13. It's I'm fine with that. And again, worth mentioning, this was Christmas Day, because this mission was launched in December over Christmas. Mm-hmm. So I believe it actually was Christmas Day they were broadcasting in the lunar orbit. So yeah, again, Christmas Day, it's a Christian holiday. I'm fine with it. I don't have a huge issue with it. I know that later in Apollo 11, Buzz Aldrin took communion on the moon, but I don't think that was broadcast or made a big deal of or anything like that. We'll talk about it more when we get to the Apollo 11 story. But yeah, different time as well. There you go.
Yeah.
So yeah.
One thing I want to just jump back on a little bit as well. You were talking about them not taking the LEM as well.
Yeah.
You imagine if this and Apollo 13 were swapped around.
Oh, they'd be fucked. There's no two ways about it.
Because they used the LEM, didn't they?
Well, they used the LEM to get them back. I mean, okay, so they would have been able to get around the moon still. Mm-hmm. They'd have still had the option to fire up the SPS engine.
Yeah.
Because, again, the only reason they didn't is they didn't have to. What they wouldn't have been able to do is, I don't think they'd have been able to find, well, no, they would have died because, again, they couldn't take shelter in the LEM. So
that's right, yeah, because when they turned everything off.
If you're running the systems on the command module, you run out of power because the fuel cells were creating the oxygen. The oxygen is used into the fuel cells and stuff like that as well. So if you were breathing there, you're just going to run out of oxygen anyway.
Yeah.
And you can do the course question. So yeah, they would have been dead.
Yeah.
So that would have been it would not have been. And they were lucky. Well, I say lucky, but I suppose it happened on Apollo 13. Again, if it happened on Apollo 11, even it could have been game over at that point.
Yeah. Well, it's just that at the beginning of the episode, they did turn around and say, well, there are no fallbacks. There's no fallback engine at all.
Yeah.
Because with the LEM, you do have that fallback engine that you could actually use that to thrust you back home, which they do in Apollo 13. But it's only until you see this where they don't take that extra thing, and once again they're trying to do everything by the book, but they're really pushing for time as well, aren't they? And they want to get up there. It's a great idea. Well, let's just not go with the LEM. That can stay at home. That can get built. We can have that ready for them. And by the time we launch again, then it'll be ready for you. But yeah, it's just NASA just pushing that a little bit. And I think with the Russians and doing their orbit, their empty capsule orbit, that got things heightened ever so much.
Yeah, I mean, this was. No, I mean, the entire Apollo program we've already established was largely rushed, and it was largely a PR exercise, or propaganda exercise, I suppose. But I don't want to take anything away from it. It was very important, but like the guy said in the first one, it was of limited scientific value in terms of actually going to the moon. Only one scientist landed on the moon. So, and again, when the N1 was rolled out, they got spooked. They were like, okay, we need to, because again, if Russians orbited the moon, they could have potentially just said, we've won. We got there first. We could have landed if we wanted to, or whatever. So, I suppose it was just they had to get the win in to see it through.
The Russians could have faked it, couldn't they? They could have had someone. They could have sent their unmanned capsule around and then created some grainy footage of someone.
So can I just address any conspiracy theorists who are listening to this? And I've already told you you're not allowed to listen to this, but if you are listening to this, if anyone was going to fake a moon landing, it would have been a Soviet, and I'll tell you why. Firstly, they lost, so if they wanted to show that they won, they'd have done it. Secondly, the Soviet regime was such that you could fake it and then make everyone involved with it disappear. Okay? No one was going to talk because Gulag, Siberia, dead.
Yeah.
You release the footage, that's it, job's done. So, I'm not winding up for it. I'm not backing down. But yeah,
I like dropping these little conspiracy things in.
I know, because it winds me up. You bastard. So yeah, I mean that was it. They then open up the valves in the engine, do the burn to leave lunar orbit, and then they come back.
Yeah, and
we end the episode with another quote. When it is dark enough, you can see the stars.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. Who said that? I did write it down. I've lost it since.
Person with significant weight in this world, I'd imagine.
Someone important. But that was that.
So how many times did they orbit the moon? They said 10. They wanted to do 10 times. Is that correct? Yeah, 10 orbits. Yeah.
Was it 10 orbits? Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, they went around a few times. Again, it didn't take them a huge amount. They weren't there for overly long. I think they were only there for a couple of, maybe a day?
Okay. Mission duration was 6 days. I think it's 2 days there, 2 days back. And no, it was 10 orbits in 1 day, in 24 hours.
Yeah. No, I think they were just there for a day because it's more than 2 days to the moon and back, isn't it?
Yeah, 2 and a bit. I don't think it's more than 3. Not more than 3.
You sure?
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's that. Interestingly enough, there's actually there's photos of the re-entry of Apollo 8. You can see them on the Wikipedia.
Cool.
which is kind of cool. It was photographed from a KC-135 as it came down. And yeah, you can actually see the spacecraft itself.
I can see that photo, yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of the spacesuits, Bill Anders' spacesuit, is on display at the Science Museum in London. So
cool.
Have to go and see that at some point.
Can I just say the patch that goes along with this mission as well?
Uh-huh.
So I am sticking the patches on the album artwork that goes along with these.
Oh, awesome.
And I think this is possibly my favourite patch for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's Apollo 8.
Yes.
And you have the trajectory of going round the Earth and then round the Moon and then back. Now, granted, that's not exactly the way they went to the Moon and back.
No.
But it forms the shape of an 8, which is quite cool in its design. And the patch itself is the shape of the capsule that they went up in.
Oh, very cool. Yeah.
Which, oh man, it's just a designer's dream. Not that I'm not a designer. Not a designer, but like it a lot.
It is cool. I don't know if I'd say it's my favourite. I don't know what I would. Maybe that's something I'll have to have a look at for next week. See,
well, now you say that, I have found a website where they create NASA patches.
Ooh.
The official place. Now, they didn't create these ones. I think they've been employed by NASA since 1971.
Okay.
And you can go on this site and you can order your own. So if I'm going to drop this in the chat room for you now, and I'll stick it in the show notes as well, if people want to.
So you can play along at home.
Yeah, so you can play along at home, and they have lots and lots of collections here. You got some Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Space Lab, MIR, Space Shuttle, Expeditions, lots and lots of other stuff as well.
Okay, I'm having a look now.
Go on.
Right.
Because these are really good.
Okay, I think I can narrow it down to... Okay, so my favourite, I think...
What one are we going for? Just the Apollo ones, or...?
Yeah, it's Apollo.
Okay, right, hang on.
So, my favourite Apollo one...
Yep.
I think it's 13.
Oh,
just on the patch. I like Apollo 13. I like the horses. Because, again, going back to Greek mythology, Apollo would pull the sun into the sky on his chariot, pulled by horses. So I quite like that. Second, I think Apollo 17. Again, we have a image of Apollo, the eagle there, and the moon. That's kind of cool. Then 11.
Yeah.
Classic. Can't really beat that. Then 12. I like the ship. Yeah. It literally is a spaceship.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Then I think it's a tie between 8 and 14. I like with 14, it has the astronaut pin.
Yes.
That's kind of cool. And then, whatever. Who cares after that point?
The worst one for me is the first lunar landed one. That's just utter bobbins as far as I'm concerned.
What you mean, Apollo 9?
After Apollo 17, you have the first lunar landing patch.
Oh, yes. I see the one.
It's terrible.
It is terrible. I don't think is that an official one?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But then further down, you got the 20th anniversary, and then the 30th anniversary, and then the 40th anniversary. Oh my God!
Stop it.
Next year,
the
50th anniversary.
Oh
my God! And we're going to keep seeing these roll out.
Yeah. So yeah. Any other thoughts on 1968 then?
Okay. My closing thoughts for it. I think it deserves to be in there. I think the mission should have been stretched out a little bit longer in the actual episode itself. I think more detail on the actual mission itself, but then you could possibly be straying into repetition if you keep doing that. So that's a juggling act that you have to balance up with the rest of the series. And I think I've seen the Lem episode or bits of the Lem episode, and the others I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
So it has its place. It's not my favourite. Some of it works well for me though, but the MTV lifestyle doesn't. So
yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, I mean,
it's a middling road one for me.
This is an episode which, and unlike anything I think in Band of Brothers, I'd probably just skip this episode if I was like just doing a watch on my own.
Yeah.
I think I would just say, you know what, I'm just going to skip to the next one. Because I do remember actually quite enjoying the next one. I can't remember it. I know it's all about the lunar land development. I remember there's a piece of music which is really cool for the LEM. But yeah, this one, it just doesn't do it for me. Not a fan. So I'm afraid that's a no from me, Bob.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids shots in the next episode, because I feel that you get some of them from the lunar module itself, and just big peering eyes over a little model.
Yeah. You're dating yourself again, mate.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, well. So, okay, well, should we end it there for this one then?
I think that's a good spot to begin our re-entry burn and to head down to the Pacific Ocean.
Good, man. Yeah, I'll fire the retro boosters later.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm driving this ship at the minute, aren't I? Yeah.
Yes,
so
sorry.
Elton.
Sorry, I'll step back. Sorry.
Step away. I'm flying this one. So Elton, where can people find you? Do your plugging of things.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us, and if you've made it this far, thank you. And if you like this, then you may like other shows that we produce at road2media.com, which is at, funny enough, road2media.com.
Funny, that is. What are the odds?
And you can find...
Weird thing is he had the domain name, but didn't have the company name. It was just serendipity. It just happened to come together like that.
There we go. It's sometimes, if it's meant to be, once again, it's meant to be. Losing all these metaphors in my brain. Anyway, so yeah, pop along to road2media.com. You can find wonderful things such as me and Andy talking about the Band of Brothers series, which we have completed. You have all of the Band of Brothers episodes, which is 10 episodes, but then you also have at the very beginning of it, Saving Private Ryan as well. So please pop along there, dive in and enjoy all that stuff. You have, what else do we have over there? Shonky Lab, which is at shonkylab.com. It has its own little own separate website as well. So you can pop along there and see all the stuff over there. And you can find all this stuff over in iTunes. I'm also on the Black Dog Podcast, which is at blackdogpodcast.com. It's a film review club type thing where 4 idiots review films. So.
And 3 of those idiots last week reviewed The Dish, which is actually tied into the Apollo story. So you should go and give that a listen to. We might possibly do it ourselves at some point. We'll see how we feel when we get to the end of this. Okay. But well worth a listen over there. So you should all go and do that.
Yes, definitely pop over there. I'm not promising anything for us reviewing it.
No, I'm not promising it either. I'm just saying we might. We'll consider it, maybe.
We might. We'll see how it goes. Anyway.
We haven't got 1,000,001 other things to do at that time.
Yeah, if we're not sick of each other, and then we have like 4 other podcasts to do together.
We might just link to the Black Dog one, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, why not?
See how that goes. And yeah, you can find me also over at rogue2media.com with Elton on the Band of Brothers podcast and on the Grand Prix podcast, where we talk about Formula One, which will be coming back sometime this week for testing, and then. The season kicks off in April, doesn't it?
No, March, end of March.
Is it end of March?
End of March.
I won't be here for that then.
Oh, no.
I'm getting married.
Really? What, that early?
Oh, yeah, end of March. This sounds like a conversation for off the cast. But yeah, I'm going to be busy that last weekend. So, yeah, we'll have to work around that somehow. But anyway.
No. Well, yeah. Well, hang on a minute. Well, I think we have to have a little talk, because this was already scheduled. Oh, well,
all right, fine. Amber, if you listen to this, apparently we have to change our plans because the Formula One season kicks off. But after that.
Well, I'm glad that was sorted.
Absolutely. Production meetings there. And yeah, as well as that, you can also find me on the Great Derelict, where it's a science fiction podcast where we just talk about everything and anything to do with science fiction. So yes, go and have a listen to that. This week we had Anne-Marie on and we talked about aliens. Not those aliens, just general aliens. Because, why wouldn't you? So yeah, I think that covers it all, don't you?
Yeah. I'll also give a little shout out. Pop along to Patreon, because we have a Patreon. We have friends like Jim Moon, and the Black Dog Podcast also has Patreon. So if you have a shekel, could you spare a shekel? Then please pop over there, and you can get free stuff for.
You could go and chuck in a buck.
Yeah, chuck a buck. Oh, I like that. Yeah, chuck a buck.
So yeah, go and check that out. I think we have a tier, whereas if we raise, I think $6 billion, we will actually pay for a trip to the moon. So yeah, if you want to send us to the moon.
Exactly. If you don't ask, you don't get.
Would you actually do a trip around the moon if someone offered it to you?
I think I said in the Apollo 13 episode that roller coasters scare me. So getting me on one of these is very highly unlikely. But I'll gladly watch from the Earth.
Good to know. I'm up for it though. So yeah, I will certainly go for a trip around the moon. So anyway, yes. You will wave. Do join us next time out, where we are doing Apollo 9 on the episode Spider.
Nice.
Cool. Well, it just leaves me to say I should go.